Brad, we're now a year past the first quarantines of 2020, and my wife had the brilliant idea of like, hey, let's get out the old Wii set for the family, the Nintendo Wii. Remember those?
Yeah, the ones where they were motion activated controllers.
Yeah, you wave your hands around like a chicken with its head cut off, and you get to play a video game. Anyway, great idea, super fun. We as a family, we were all into it. We loved it. There's a lot of fun things you can do: archery, bowling, canoeing, all sorts of things that are fun. You know.
Yes.
I have to tell you this though. I was like, oh, this is great. In my mind, I was like, we'll get the kids moving. That's what this will be great for. We'll get the kids moving. They'll move their bodies.
Those kids need to move.
Those kids need to move. Guess what happened after literally one turn of a dance game? Old Pop over here literally broke his butt. I pulled some weird muscle in my butt. My right butt cheek.
You pulled a muscle?
My right butt cheek, and I was like, I'm literally playing Nintendo Wii? This is what it's become? I pulled my butt cheek playing Nintendo Wii?
What kind of dancing were you doing?
Apparently, Brad, I was too on point. I was too on fleek. I was bringing out my best moves, and I broke my butt. I broke my butt playing a video game, Brad Geiger.
How do you come back from that? I mean, do you tell anybody, or do you just sit down on the left cheek?
Well, I go to bed that night, kind of like limping my way to bed, going like, I'm not the man you married anymore.
And she said, I know.
She said, I'm aware I don't need a mirror for that, no.
Well, listen, there's so much to unpack there. Number one, I became a really good Wii bowler. Like,
did you really?
I will get into little obsessions. And I got into an obsession with Wii bowling where I got up every morning and started by playing like 5 games just to get it out of my system. I did.
Really?
It didn't last forever. It lasted for a couple of weeks. But I became a really good Wii bowler because I became fascinated with the mechanics of it. And I had to figure it out.
I'm not necessarily making fun of that. I've had those moments in my life, but what's funny about that is, have you ever had this moment as a parent where you're like, nope, it's time for me to get back into shape. I'm going to wake up before everybody and go for a mile run. And then by the time everybody's waking up, then I will have gone for a run. In the meantime, you're like, nope, going to grab these 2 controllers and stand here in the living room in my PJs and just get a couple of rounds of bowling in. That's the stuff.
Oh, and they're so smart because if you become a little bit better, they give you a nicer bowling ball. And then you get a nicer ball. So I was trying to get that nicer bowling ball with the little star on it. And oh my God, I'm so from Michigan. The other thing I needed to talk about in terms of this is you're right. We are now officially, and we're recording this show ahead of time. It's March right now. But we're coming upon the first anniversary of quarantine here in Pennsylvania, at least. And I told my storytelling students, there's good news. We are now officially living in precedented times. This is fantastic. We're now officially in precedented times. We're never going to have to hear another announcer on some fake commercial saying, in these unprecedented times, it's important to remember we're all in this together. We don't have to listen to those ads anymore.
We here at Chevy are with you in these unprecedented times. And that's why the new Chevy Malibu is 10% off.
We're all in this together, and that's why you should buy a truck.
Yeah, exactly. That's funny. In these unprecedented times, we here at Subway know that sandwiches are important.
Oh, all of these fake modeling, the slow piano music, the B-roll of people, looking out their windows at the empty park bench. We don't have to listen to any of that anymore because these are officially precedented times, and I'm happy to be living in them.
Absolutely. Speaking of precedented times, the thing that occurred to me this morning, because I realized that it's rare that like a repeated journalistic story gets to me, but this idea that there is vaccine hesitancy, when most of us would punch a shark to get a shot right now.
Oh, yes.
The fact that the press is like counter programming, like, oh, there's vaccine hesitancy. F you. There is no vaccine hesitancy. We don't wrestle a Russian bear right now to get a vaccine shot.
There might be 3 people out there with vaccine hesitancy, and quite frankly, if they get cold from the herd, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, they're all sharing one tooth, are those 3 people. So listen. On that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about insulting people with one tooth and making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, who never got the star in Nintendo Wii Bowling. I'm the cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And before we jump into it, we want to give a huge shout out and a thanks to our friends over at Bonjoro.com, Bonjoro.com. And as a reminder, Bonjoro is a platform that lets you immediately thank in a personal way the people that join you on Patreon, the people that buy things from your store, the people that get your original art, all the sort of transactional things that people would do and get like an automated, hello, this is Brad Geiger, this is Dave Kellett, right. I'm sending you an email to thank you. Right now, you get a notice right as they buy the thing or they join the Patreon, and you can say, hey, send Susan a note. And so I turn around at my desk, I get my drawing desk in the background, I get all my framed original art on the wall behind me, and I go, hey, Susan, it's me in the studio. And I'm so thankful that you jumped in and got Drive Act 2 in the store or joined me on Patreon or whatever it is. And that personal touch is amazing. But Brad, the thing that we haven't really mentioned before is that at the end of these videos, you can append a call to action on there that actually increases sales and increases action in other parts of your business, right?
Absolutely. This was such a brilliant move when I realized that you could do this. So what you do is you program a little pop-up that comes at the end of your video, and you say, for example, 10% off coupon for the Evil Inc. store. And you program that over at your store, you give them the coupon. So basically what happens is at the end of this video, while you've got this person feeling extra special and feeling fantastic about getting involved in your comics life, this pops up and says they can also get 20% off or 10% off buying an extra book at your store, doing this, doing that. Do you know the turnover on that it made my eyes bulge out? It was amazing to me how effective that was in generating even extra sales from somebody that you just welcomed aboard as becoming, for example, a Patreon backer.
Yeah, it's and what's cool is you can have it go into a discount code for your store. You could have it point to your Kickstarter that you're running at the moment. You could have it say, "Hey, I noticed you joined for my comic A. Have you seen my comic B that also is running?"
Yeah.
And have the link to that store. You can have a call to action really to anything that you want to point to in your comic making career. So we are really happy that Bonjoro is joining us. And remember, you can try it now for a 14-day trial. That's free. That's for everybody. You just sign up. You can try it for 14 days. See what you think about it. See if you agree with us that it is incredibly cool to be able to individually greet and individually thank the people that make your cartooning possible. And then when you're ready to pull the trigger, you can use the code ComicLabApril, all one word, ComicLabApril, to get 20% off the rest of your life.
Absolutely. And that's just for ComicLab backers and ComicLab listeners. And I'm telling you, you don't know how powerful this is to call your Patreon backer by name or to call a new customer by name. Look them in the eye through your video and say, thank you, whatever their name is, Jim. Thank you, Jim. For being a part of what I'm doing. That is a super powerful thing, and it's happening in the moment. I'm telling you, sign up for that 14-day trial and just watch the reaction you get. If you're not wowed after 14 days, I'll eat my hat. It completely changed the way I was looking at business.
That's right. So head over to Bonjoro.com, Bonjoro.com, or check out the links on Patreon or our social media that'll take you over. And don't forget to use the coupon code ComicLabApril to get 20% off your entire run, your entire life use of Bonjoro.com. And Brad, our first question this week comes in from Patreon.com/ComicLab pal Brandon Heyman. And Brandon writes, "Hey guys, I'm working on a long form comic and often find myself faced with wondering just how good is my comic. Like you guys, enjoy the creator-owned aspect of making comics, meaning I don't answer to anyone but me and my readers. So, could you two speak to writing comics without an editor? In other words, if you have no one on the outside looking in, how do you know when you've written something really special. Thanks so much. So, Brandon writes a perfectly legitimate question about, like, if you don't have an editor, if you don't have a publisher, if you don't have a third party telling you, Brad, this page is gold, we're going to make money, but Gabby Hayes money on this page. How do you know, Brad, when you've struck gold?
Oh, well, okay, let's start here, Brendan. I want you to come in close to your speaker. I'm just going to talk to Brandon for a second here. Yeah, come here, close to the speaker. I've got something I want you to think about. What makes you so sure that editor knows what they're talking about? Why are you so convinced they know anything that you don't know? That's a big hurdle you got to cross. What makes you think that editor knows anything? They're just another guy. They're just another person. They might be faking their way through the day just the way I'm faking my way through my day. They don't necessarily know anything. They're just another person. That editor cannot give you a seal of approval. The publisher cannot give you a seal of approval. It's just another person. So I don't want you to get all wound up in this whole idea of I'm working without an editor. That editor is just another pair of eyes. So that's once you realize that, and now we can, I've got 3 ideas for you to replace that pair of eyes. First of all, and this one I swear by, and man, Dave, every time I say this, it gets a few people really upset, but I really believe it's true, and that is it's impossible to hide good work on the internet for long. I'm going to add those last 2 words as a little bit of a caveat, because there are some people who are doing good work, but they just started like last week or last month, right? And they're still building their audience. But it's hard to hide, if not impossible, to hide good work on the internet for long. Mm-hmm. So if you're posting stuff on the web, and you have been doing for a little while now, and you're getting engagement, if you're getting responses, then you're doing good work. If you're getting a few responses, you're doing pretty good work. If you're getting more responses, you're doing better work. If you're getting a lot of responses, you're doing very good work. That's the first way I would use, Dave, to gauge myself. Am I doing good work? And that would be what's my engagement on social media, on Patreon, on Kickstarter. Those are the ways that I'm gauging myself. If I'm getting good, positive responses, then I'm doing good work. And if not, I've got work to do. I've got some improvement to do. What do you think?
Well, I like this. Can I make a comparison, and you can tell me if this is appropriate to what you're trying to describe? I'm a stand-up comedian. I'm doing jokes up on stage, and I go, I don't know if I'm doing good. And you say to me, Dave, are you getting a few laughs? Then you're doing okay. Are you getting a lot of laughs? Then you're doing great. Are you getting a huge amount of laughs? Then you're doing gangbusters. Is that a version of what you're saying? Like, listen, the response that you're getting is the signals of whether you are doing good work or not. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're horrible, but what if you're not getting a whole lot of response? It either means like you're in your first year of building at social media, and you've got to pay attention to that aspect of your business, or if you're just not getting response week after week after month, it means you've got some improvement to do. If you're like 80% of web cartoonists or independent cartoonists, that improvement probably has to come from the writing department. You're probably not writing stuff that's connecting with your audience. If you're doing humor, that number raises to 95% in my estimation. It means that your jokes aren't landing, your punchlines aren't landing. You need to work on not only your setup, but you need to work on pushing those concepts. So many of us are so happy to settle for a 2 or a 5 on a scale of funny that goes from 1 to 10. We're happy. Sometimes, Dave, you see this all the time. They're happy with a 5, but if you push it, it could be an 8. If you push it, it could be you could get to a 10. We do it on Writer's Room quite often, where you come in with a joke pitch, for example, and it's a good joke, and we push that sucker till it's an 8 or a 9. chances are, if you're not getting good engagement on the web, and if you've been doing it for a while, right? If it's not your first week or your first month, if you've been doing this for a couple of years and you're just not getting engagement, you need to take a hard look and an objective look at what you're producing, and you need to find where you need to improve. Again, I'm going to tell you, probably going to be the writing.
Yeah, I 1,000% co-sign that. I will say this. You had something a few weeks ago that I think was incredibly helpful for a lot of us, myself included, which is that you have the audience you deserve. And part of that is, like you said at the beginning of this chat today, you can't hide good work under a rock on the internet. It spreads on its own. It finds it. It's like life in Jurassic Park. It finds a way, you know.
Yes.
And so, if you find after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years that it's really not clicking, and you're like, why is my audience not growing? It's because maybe it needs to have a critical look at it. And so what do you do in that moment? Well, what I would do, what I have done, is I go through my archives and I say, what really clicked? Okay, this one really spread. Why did it spread? Okay, well, it tapped into this pre-existing audience of fans for XYZ. Okay, that's okay. So that's a little separate one. But why did that one click? Okay, that one clicked because look at, it's much crisper writing. It's shorter. It's easier in and you're out. The characters are more clearly represented right away in the comic. You don't need to know a ton of backstory. Okay, so I need to do more of that. And what that self-critique goes is like, all right, this one clearly didn't click because it has 3 times the verbiage that the other one does. You need to know a lot of backstory, and it's very obscure what this joke is referencing. It's like you have to be a niche of a niche to know what this, or niche of a niche, I guess, to know what this joke is. And so that kind of thing, the helpful, critiqueful eye that you can give your own work is a great way to say, why is my audience not growing?
Yeah, and here's I'm gonna before I move on to point number 2, I'm gonna put a little
we're only on point number 1. This is how much, Brandon. This is the value you're getting for this question.
I've got so many thoughts. Now, when you get your engagement, and I'm noticing this happening over the years a lot. If your engagement on social media is only coming from other cartoonists, beware. That's not real engagement. What that is kind of an unspoken quid pro quo. I'll like your stuff if you like my stuff, right? And there's a lot of that going on, and it might be somebody saying on a professional level, you know, if they're getting in touch and they're saying, I like what you did there. Here's specifically what I like. If they're doing that sort of thing, that's great. But if it's just hitting that heart button on Twitter, right? If it's just that, if it's that low-level engagement, I'm not saying that it's not genuine. It might very well be genuine, but those aren't the fish that you want to catch. Those you're not, unless you're doing a comic that's aimed at other independent cartoonists. But unless you're doing that, you're out to get the civilians. That's where your career is going to be built, not on other. That's why I don't like this idea of going to a Facebook group and saying, hey, here's my comic. It's a Facebook group for other cartoonists. And they say, hey, it's time to market your comic. And you go in and say, here's a link to my comic. If you think that's marketing, you're nuts. You don't market to other cartoonists. Your fish are swimming in deeper waters. So yes, if you're getting likes from other cartoonists, they might be game recognizes game. It might be very good. It might be genuine. But you need to go further than that. You need to go into the deep waters where you've got more fish. That's where your career is going to be built, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I think the problem too is like you don't want to be going back to comedians. You don't want to be the comedian that they're called that because they don't actually get an audience, but other comedians love them. You don't, as a cartoonist, you don't want to become that. So that's a careful. So Brad, what's point number 3? Let's jump into that one.
Let me give you point number 2 before I go to point number 3. But
sorry, okay.
but these are going to be real quick. They're just something that's very easy to point out, and that is number 1. If you want to know if you're good, find somebody who's doing work that you respect and ask them. You will find out that 8 chances out of 10, you're going to get somebody very happy to give you an answer. I'd say 8. It's probably closer, but there might be 1 or 2 that don't because they just don't have the time or what have you. But if you find somebody who's doing work you respect and ask them, you're going to probably get an answer. Now, beware, there might be some of them that you might have to pay for their time. Right? They might say, I'd be like, for me, I'll be happy to do a consultation, but it's going to cost you because I cannot give up the time anymore that I'm doing for ProTips and ComicLab and so on and so forth. So, so reach out to a fellow cartoonist who you respect and get and ask. Take that step and ask. I'm telling you, you're probably going to get an answer. And point number 3, I'm going to say it, Dave. The ComicLab Discord server. There are 2 different channels inside that ComicLab Discord server. One is Writer's Room and one is Critique Central. I have seen people bring writing pitches into Writer's Room and get fantastic feedback. Yep. And I've seen people bring finished work into Critique Corner and get really good, no holds barred, honest responses from people who are doing very good work. I'm telling you, if you become a Patreon backer and jump over to that Discord server, those are 2 places that you can get really good, high quality feedback. And it's moderated. Dave and I check in from time to time. So if somebody goes in there and they're shooting their mouth off, they don't know what they're talking about, we will very politely say, hey, I don't think you quite understand the concept. And we've done that a couple times. I don't think you quite understand what you're talking about. Let's talk about this in a deeper way. And you don't have a situation like on a Facebook group where you get lots of information from people who have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, a lot of chaff, very little wheat. Exactly. Yeah. And then, you know what, I'm going to add a 4th one on here because I found this technique. We've talked about this before on the show. I found this helpful in my own writing. When you're trying to decide if the thing that you just wrote is good, read it in your mind to the funniest person that you know. You'll know how they would react to that page, that storyline, that joke. There are times, like there was one yesterday, I wrote a joke that made me chuckle to no end. I don't know if anyway, in my mind, I read it to Brad Geiger, and he was like, oh, that joke's gold. I love it. But you can do it with whoever you want in your life. Read it to your imaginary version of Neil Gaiman in your mind, and Neil will tell you, like, that's a little tropey. Oh, it's a little, we've seen that before. Like, you can read that to the greats in your mind, and they will tell you what they think of it. Like there is an editor in your mind, and sometimes it just needs to take the form of another personality to tell you, this is not really what you want to go for. So, Brad, I think those are 3 solid points, and I'm excited because as we are finishing up, the lights are blinking and telling us that our special guest is here. So it's time to put out the cat, change into better clothes, comb our hair, grab a glass of water, make yourself a cup of tea, and let's pull up a chair for our special guest.
So, Dave, guess what? I've got fantastic news. We've got a guest on ComicLab, and you're not going to believe who we got. We got a friend, my friend. We got a friend. Yes, we do. We've got the one and only Tauhid Bondia, and if you've been reading comics, this person is Tauhid. Correct me if I'm wrong. You've been doing this 20 years, just like Dave over there.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, mostly in obscurity, but yeah.
Not in obscurity.
Much like Dave over there.
But I was going to say not in obscurity because I have been watching your style for, I don't know, the better part of 15, 18 years.
Really?
Yeah.
And I have to say, in a way that I hope you take only as the highest compliment, I feel like you have leveled up in the last 3, 4, 5 years in a way that only comes from years and years and hours and hours and hours of work where I can feel it. You are comfortable in your style. Your line art is your own. It has flow. I know from where you come, like I see the inspirations, but you have made it uniquely your own. Wow. And it's kind of a wonderful thing to see someone's style just click in the last 4 or 5 years in a way that is awesome. And I wonder if we could talk to you a bit about how you are feeling about your style right now.
Yeah. No, oh, wow, that's really kind of you to say, and I guess it kind of tracks when I think about my journey artistically. That things would, kind of click in the last 3 or 4 years. That sounds about right.
Okay,
because in the early years, I think probably the biggest significant change to my style in recent times has been my motivations. In the early years, I really was just in it to get webcomic famous. and you guys know what I mean by that.
Sure.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
You guys, Scott Kurtz, Chris Straub, Mike and Jerry were huge inspirations to me at the time, and I really wanted to be you. Yeah, I was convinced that you guys were all pulling down six figures and had inboxes full of love letters.
Dave, we had him fooled.
I really did. And
I'm living in a van down by the river, so we had you fooled.
No, but I mean, yeah. So I wanted that life, you know. So when I got into it, I had the artistic skill, and I thought, well, all I have to do is come up with a comic that's going to make me famous. And so I would pick and choose genres based on what had a built-in audience that I thought I could tap into, but not anything that I loved or really cared about, you know? And that kind of came through in the art. So the comics didn't do super well. They didn't make me famous. And I went from comic to comic doing that. And it really wasn't until about 2016 that, 2016 happened. And I started drawing comics about things that I really cared about. You know, that's when I started A Problem Like Jamal.
Yeah.
I was kind of giving a voice to a lot of those issues that were just on my mind at the time. It wasn't getting the job done to just shout about it on social media.
So is it fair to say that you stopped doing a comic that you thought was for someone else and started doing a comic for you?
Yes. That's absolutely right. I started doing a comic for me. I wasn't trying to get paid off of it or anything. I had a job that I loved. But lo and behold, that's the one that took off for me first. That was the most successful comic that I'd ever worked on as far as, you know, the number of readers that I had.
Yeah, and give everybody, for folks that haven't seen it before, and I definitely want to talk to you about the character design of the father, the dad, in 1 second. But give everybody a quick elevator pitch of what that comic was, what it was about, what it meant for you.
Yeah, sure. A Problem Like Jamal is just basically about this kid named Jamal, little black kid named Jamal, and his family. He lives with his mother and his older brother. And it was just daily life, being a kid in a predominantly white neighborhood in a predominantly white area. And it dealt with some of the sensitive issues of the time, like even up to and including police brutality. And like I said, it was really just a way for me to kind of give a voice to those things and feel like I was not doing nothing at the time. It was a sort of an activism. Taking
sort of the venting that we would all have done at different points on social media and channeling it into your comic, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And like, I think the best way I think you described it at some point like this, where you said it was like a marriage between Calvin and Hobbes and Boondocks, which I thought, that's a brilliant like elevator pitch of what that comic was.
Yeah, I think. Yeah,
and I should say is it still on hiatus in your mind, or is that one ever coming back, do you think?
You know, I don't know. Historically, when something goes on hiatus in my mind, it stays on hiatus forever. But
yeah.
The reason that I stopped making Jamal was because it kind of did its job, you know.
Wow.
It helped me to express a lot of those things that I was anxious about, and just kind of the reception, you know, restored my faith in humanity a little bit. It kind of opened some doors to have these dialogues that turns out I really needed to have, and you know, as my anxiety levels went down. And as my faith in humanity was restored a little bit, the voice of the comic came harder and harder until it got to a point where I was kind of forcing it, you know, and I had to make a choice. I can either capitalize on the attention that this comic is getting and just kind of push through, or I can just let it go and come back to it later if I need to. Considering the origins of the comic, I'd be remiss to say I'll never need that voice again, but who knows?
God, I know, isn't that true? Jeez. Yeah. So for you, was it about, in terms of transitioning from one comic to another, was it about finding that balance between, I don't know how to describe it, between joy and righteous venom, or was it, you know what I mean? That sort of like, Did it get too much filled with spleen at one point where you're like, no, I want to bring this back, or was it like, no, it did its job in terms of carrying me through, frankly, a crap period for the country and for me, or and so I guess what I'm saying is, was it more of a writing challenge that you wanted to switch to, or it had done its job for you as a personal narrative that at that point it was time to move on?
I think the second thing, I think it did its job and it didn't feel true to the comic anymore to keep it going. There was a period at the very end of the comic where you see, there's a storyline that starts where the kids are playing D&D or Jamal's playing D&D with his dad and stepmom. And I kind of, step back and look at that and I was like, is that really what I want to be doing with this comic strip? Like, that might be a story I want to tell, but I don't know if that's what I want to be doing with this comic strip. And I thought, okay, maybe it's time to hang this up and start because one of the things that a problem like Jamal did for me was when 2016 happened, I couldn't draw. I couldn't, I hadn't made a comic strip in a while. I was kind of getting the itch, but I couldn't just sit down and make funny comic strips about funny characters, having a good old time.
Right.
With everything that was going on. So A Problem Like Jamal was the only comic strip I could draw at the time. And by the time I got to the end of it, it had sort of gifted me back my creativity. So I was able to, from that point, branch out from that sort of topic.
Right,
And,
right. And so that I don't want to transition into Crabgrass yet because I got to ask you one quick question,
Sure.
which is the dad character in A Problem Like Jamal is, to me, is one of the most fantastic character designs I literally ever seen in my life. And I just want to talk to you for a second about, can you describe the process of creating that character? Because it is, you have a very, I guess, in Crabgrass and even in Jamal, there's sort of a round head character for a lot of kids, which is a lot of us do that for, sort of the sweeter, younger kid.
Yeah.
And the dad has, I don't know how you describe it, like a squeezed conical shape for a head, but it is strong, it's muscular, and it's a really cool design. I just wanted you to talk about that for 1 second, if you would.
Sure. I'm not sure where I learned that idea of, when you're drawing different shapes, you take basically an orb shape and you squeeze it someplace, and whatever shape you end up with is the shape that you go with. And that's kind of what I did with the dad. But I also was trying to capture this sort of iconic Black father image that I had in my head from old TV shows like Good Times and Rock, if anybody even knows what that is. But and even like Family Matters, just this sort of thick, kind of, Black father. So that was kind of, as far as his body shape goes, he was going to be sort of thick and muscular, but yeah.
But it was great too, because Brad, I don't know, maybe you want to chime in on this, but it was great because as a dad myself, it's also great to show like strength, but also like dad strength, which is like dad strength with a couple extra pounds on him, but still strong, but a couple of dad pounds on him. Like it was, I don't know, it's just a great character design. Before we move on to Crabgrass, I just want to compliment you on that design because
thank you.
To me, it was one of the best designs
I
think I've ever seen from you, and it was really great work. So now jumping into Crabgrass, Brad, why don't you? I've been talking over Brad all day. We'll let Brad chime in. I'm sorry, Brad.
Well, I'm going to build on that because we didn't talk about it, so we got to throw a quick plug in there. The best place I think to read Crabgrass is on Instagram, and the handle there is Crabgrass Comic, right?
Yes, at Crabgrass.
So, looking at Crabgrass, having followed that journey, Crabgrass is set in the 80s, right?
I like to think of it as sort of the late 80s, very early 90s, like 90, 91 at the most.
Now, is that connected to that feeling that brought you to A Problem Like Jamal? Was that an attempt to separate yourself from all of that was happening in the late 2000s?
Not necessarily. I think there's a connection there in that with Jamal, I was drawing something very personal, and this comic Crabgrass is sort of based on myself as a kid and my best friend who I lived next door to, And so we've got to jump back in
Oh
time.
my God, you live next door to your best friend?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really convenient.
Oh, how many play dates was that a week? That's amazing. Live next door to your best friend. Oh,
pretty much every day, yeah.
Oh,
But, yeah,
so
but,
it's a nostalgia factor for you then with
Yes,
Crabgrass, just like
absolutely.
setting it in that time period. Yeah. I get that absolutely. So what would the elevator pitch for that comic be for folks that are not yet familiar with it?
Yeah. I think the larger appeal of the comic strip is a sort of remember when, good old days type of thing.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I also try to display that warts and all.
Mhm.
So it's all the things that you love. There's tons of references to pop culture and toys and things from that era, but also there's the sense of the way that things were different back then weren't always good.
Right.
It's easy to say, well, we didn't have to wear bike helmets and pads and we turned out just fine. Well, a lot of us didn't. And one of the first story arcs in Crabgrass, Kevin breaks his arm and riding his bike. And, there's that whole thing that happened. We got injured a lot because of the sort of, wild child culture that we had going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. We had that culture of, we always say we went out and played and we didn't come home for supper until the streetlights came on,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
The only problem, sometimes that didn't work out so well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Well, now listen, Tauhid, were you that kid that was always drawing in class?
absolutely I was. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
definitely always drawing in class. And it was this it was an attention seeking behavior, Like it was this thing that I could do that not everybody else could do. And it was a way to, kind of be cool or interesting or whatever. And it was far more interesting to me than anything that any teacher had to say at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, were you like Brad and I, and a little quieter, a little shyer than the average kid, and maybe that was your outlet, or was it just one of many outlets for you?
No, that was me. I wasn't into sports. I wasn't, I didn't have a huge social circle. I had a few very close friends, but yeah, I was kind of a wallflower, but still managed to get, by the time I graduated high school, still managed to get voted most creative because everyone knew I could draw because I was always drawing all the time.
Heck yeah, you did. Well, now let me ask you this. When did you know, and maybe this was many years on, when did you know the thing that I want to do is I want to be a cartoonist? I want to be creating a cartoon, every day or regularly or whatever, not just as a hobby, but as a huge chunk of your life. When did you know that was the case?
Gosh, when I knew that I wanted to do cartoons professionally was probably in the early 2000s when I was a member of the Penny Arcade forum board, the Artist Corner. I don't know if you guys ever hung out there.
I remember it. Yeah, I didn't hang out there, but I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was, I kind of fell into that group, and that was my old stomping ground for a few years. And that place was just full of really talented artists and cartoonists. And of course, I was there because I loved Penny Arcade. You know, that was a huge inspiration to me. And then there was you guys and Scott and Chris, and just kind of, there was that whole I'm going to get rich being a web cartoonist mentality. So I think it was around that time that I decided to start my first webcomic, kind of bolstered by the artistic community at the forum board there.
Yeah. And what was that first comic?
Okay, boy.
And can we still? And is it still?
Brad, you're twisting the knife here, I guess, historically.
Oh, are you?
You did notice how I tried to just gloss over that? Okay. No, that first comic was pretty bad. That it was called Spells and Whistles. Because, like I said,
Spells and Whistles.
Yeah.
That's a great name.
Title, though, come on, that's a great title. Spells and Whistles.
I thought it was a great title. At the time, like I said, I was just trying to pick a genre that had a built-in audience. So I thought I'm going to be the guy doing the Gag-A-Day comic strip about Tolkien-esque Dungeons and Dragons type stuff. Never played Dungeons and Dragons in my life. Didn't read any of the Lord of the Rings books, but I thought, I know how to draw an elf. I know how to draw a troll, so I'm going to make a comic about this. And, I had an audience basically of my friends in the forum board, and I think at its peak, there were around 300 or 400 people reading the comic strip. But it kind of petered out after that because I didn't know anything about that genre or really care about the genre.
Now, I have a vague memory of your work at this point, and tell me if this is a false memory.
Okay.
Did you draw with a very strong, heavy outline style for a character?
Yes.
Like the character would be a certain line art, and then the outline would be very heavy?
Didn't everybody though? That was it wasn't that like the thing to do like at the time.
Oh, I'm not critiquing. I'm not critiquing.
Yeah,
I'm
I
saying
absolutely
that's
did that, yes.
that's the memory I have of your style at the time.
I absolutely experimented with that. There was a prevalent style at the time that was kind of Powerpuff Girl chic. That everyone everything was very geometrical and there was this huge heavy outline around everything. And I adopted that for a while, definitely during the beginning of Bells and Whistles.
Yeah, but you even then though, I just because I want to say this as a compliment, even then you stood out. You had the chops even back then in terms of sort of natural leg up in terms of. I remember thinking, "Ooh, this guy's good. This guy's got the chops." And you have only the thing that's joy filled for me to check in as sometimes we do with different artists. You check in every couple of years and like, oh damn, they've gotten so much better. Oh my god, they've gotten so much better. And like for me, the joy of seeing your level of artistry now with Crabgrass, honestly, is some of the best work I see going right now. And if you haven't checked it out yet, but again, on Instagram, you want to look for Crabgrass, but you can also do it at gocomics.com. And it is this wonderful mix of, and I hope you don't mind me saying this. A little bit of Richard Thompson in terms of cul-de-sac, a little bit of Watterson in terms of Calvin and Hobbes, and then a whole lot of you in a way that is uniquely your own. You have made that style so magical and sweet and yet grounded and realistic. I love your trees. I think you're I don't know why I'm always attracted.
You draw a good tree. You've got a friend in Dave Kellett for life.
I know that sounds so lame, but it's true. You draw great trees and I love your trees.
I certainly appreciate a good tree, knowing how difficult they are to draw.
Yeah. But the organic flow of branches is not an easy thing to get right, and you have that down. Anyway, what I'm getting at, though, is I want to ask you, because I actually, on some of them, I can't tell if you're drawing with ink on paper or digital, or if you're mixing both, and I wanted to ask you process, what is that process for you on Crabgrass?
I do everything 100% digital. And
okay.
I've drawn digitally for years and years now. Occasionally I'll find myself in need of a pencil and I'm like tearing the house apart because I don't even own one. But right now, like on Crabgrass, I do everything on the iPad Pro. And for all of Crabgrass and the end of Problem Like Jamal, I've been working on the iPad Pro with Clip Studio Paint, their app. Before that, though, I know this is the House of Wacom. Before that, I had the Cintiq Companion, which I had for years and years, and just ran that until the wheels fell off. I couldn't afford to immediately get another one, so I downgraded to the iPad Pro. But it's a fantastic machine, and I haven't looked back.
Well, can I ask you one more question about the iPad Pro? Because you're the first person that I've seen doing your level of consistent, amazing work on an iPad Pro. What is your workflow for saving files? I know that's a ridiculous question in terms of, but for a comics making show, do you save them to Dropbox from your iPad Pro? Do you keep them on the iPad and then transition them to your computer? How do you do that?
The Clip Studio Pro has their own folder that they create on the iPad that goes to the cloud.
Okay.
If you have that service subscribed to, but I don't really trust that, so I then go ahead and save it on Dropbox. So I use the Clip Studio format file. I save it on the iPad, on the cloud, and then on Dropbox. And then I go ahead and save a TIFF format also on Dropbox.
So triply redundant. And you know what? I think all three of us, having worked for 20 years in comics, would say there is nothing wrong with being triply redundant.
Right.
Yeah, I'm looking at another external hard drive just to keep a physical sort of server at home full of all of this stuff. Because, I mean, the cloud is fantastic, and it's, as you know, it's a game changer. It's changed my life for the better, but it still scares the heck out of me to have all my stuff on someone else's computer.
Yes.
Yeah. That's
absolutely.
The truth.
Absolutely.
Here's one thing. Since we brought up spells and whistles, and I was just reviewing it because you can still find it, by the way, on the web if you're looking.
You know what's so excited, Brad. Good job.
But you know what? No, well, listen. All you got to do is look at the first several years of Greystone Inn to know that I've got some really, you started much, much further ahead than I did. But what's fascinating to me is that you've gotten looser over the years. In other words, spells and whistles, very geometric, very solid. You can see you can see that clearly you were a fan of Penny Arcade and Scott Kurtz. Sure. Very, very solid art. Crabgrass is loose and joyful and kinetic, and I think Dave said organic. Talk about that transition. What was the process there as an artist? How'd you get loose? I haven't been able to do that.
Well, okay.
Brad wants to know how to unclench, basically, Tauhid.
Yes,
that's what he's
I'm
looking
sorry,
to do. It's been 20 years of clenching. Help my friend unclench.
I'm sorry, Brad, you can't teach that. That's that's your own journey. No, but
that's your own journey.
But no, I can tell you that for me in the beginning, before I decided that I wanted to become a comic strip artist, I thought that I wanted to be a comic book artist, long form. So a lot of my, artistic development happened practicing to draw comic book pages. With the a lot of pinups and full body shots and things like that, and detail oriented and things like that, and very just sort of technically emphasized. So when it was time to draw comic strips, I started out just basically doing little tiny comic book panels, and there was a lot of detail and things like that in it, and it was way more heavy and technical than it needed to be, and it just took years and years and years of kind of refining my process, because it used to take me forever to draw a comic strip, but it took years and years and years of refining my process to kind of get an eye for the lines that I don't need, and I have a heavy influence from Bill Watterson, and there's just something so organic about his work. I once heard that he would pick up a branch from his yard and paint with that, and just the very definition of organic. And always, even though I was drawing digitally, tried to capture as much of that sort of organic nature in my lines.
Right. I'd never heard that story about the branch before, but honest to God, if your next line would have been, and then the bluebird would have ascended onto his shoulder as he painted, I would have been like, yep, that sounds like Bill. All right, that's also my internal vision of how he paints and how he works. So yes.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, that could be total fiction, but I absolutely believe it.
But you know what, Tate, if we need that for our own internal storytelling, then that's okay. The forest creatures are coming up to Bill and being like, "What are we painting today, Bill?" that's okay by me.
Well, listen, I got to tell you, Tauhid, this has been an absolute joy having you on the show today. Yes. Now, your work is at Instagram over at Crabgrass Comic, and that's Crabgrass Comic singular, right?
Yes.
And also at Go Comics. You can check it out at gocomics.com/crabgrass. And also, the most important one, let's make sure that we mention Patreon, where you're tearing it up, my friend, at patreon.com/7AUHID. That's Tauhid, but with a 7 instead of a T, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and some fantastic stuff going on over there at Patreon as well. Tauhid, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been fantastic.
Oh, wow. Thank you guys for having me. This has been really great.
And honestly, congratulations on being super talented. That's a nice thing to be in life. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
No, thank you, my friend. And keep tearing it up, because we have been admirers of your work for a long while now. So we are so happy you joined us, and congratulations on all the good things happening for you.
Right back at you guys. You guys are doing the Lord's work here. I never miss an episode. I have it on all the time while I'm drawing. It's really my pleasure and honor to be here talking to you guys. It's fantastic.
That's awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
So, Dave, you got your taxes paid off. At the point that this podcast hits, it's going to be the week of April 15th. You got your and just as a reminder to those of you listening at home, estimated taxes are due April 15th, along with anything you owe for 2020 taxes. You're all set?
Brad, I gotta tell you, I will punch you in your beautiful mouth. How dare I just had a lovely chat with a cartoonist I admire, and now you are bringing this up.
I know.
This is like airing family business. No, yes, I'm done with taxes. For me, here's the unfortunate truth about, I love the fact that I have incorporated my cartooning. I love that I'm an S Corp for Sheldon and Drive, and my film with sequential films with strip film is also an S Corp. So, but because of that, though, I have to get all my taxes kind of ready for a March 15th filing, because that's when corporate filings are. Personal filings are on the 15th. So by the time the 15th rolls around, it's kind of a denouement of like, I've already done that. That's old hat. So my miserable period is like the end of February, early March, where it's just downloading a bajillion PDFs from bank statements and gathering up scraps of paper that are blown by the wind. You know, it's just, I hate it. And you know what's funny? You and I talked about this, that every year I say, I'm going to do it at the end of every month. I'm going to update my P&L and my balance sheet. I'm going to have all my documentation into QuickBooks. Every month I'm going to do it. And then every year, Brad, in spring, I'm doing 3 weeks of solid tax stuff every year because I didn't do it.
And just to tell on myself, every year I bring it up in ProTips. Listen, you need to do your monthly profit and loss statement every month. You got to get into the habit. The furthest I've made it has been April.
This is the equivalent of physician heal thyself, because this is the equivalent of Brad and I going, you know what you need to do? Eat better and exercise. Eat better and exercise. Guess what?
Like
I'm actively stuffing this cronut into my face right now.
Yes, but I'm telling you, this year I'm going to do it. I've already done my P&L for January.
You know what?
And
Your
February,
lips to God's ears, Brad. Your lips to God's ears. I'm going to believe it when I see it.
I got so mad at myself sitting there doing that. It took an entire week off of my productivity. It was like as bad as going to a convention. And I made about as much money. And I'm never doing that again. I am doing that monthly. I'm telling you, fist to wood, I am going to do that profit and loss so I don't have to get behind the 8 ball.
Well, listen, I go with God. I hope you do it, because it will make your tax season a pleasant, like, little summary of work you've already done, rather than like, everybody in the family go to bed. I'm going to be up with QuickBooks till 1 a.m. again.
Yeah, and nobody talked to me during that time.
Yes,
I don't want to say
I need like
a word.
a weird, odd silence. I don't even have to be like, I had Mozart on for one period. I was like, Mozart, you're too loud. Stop it. I'm trying to do taxes.
That's it. I need to think about numbers. I don't mind taxes. I love public schools. I love paved roads.
I believe in paying taxes. Yes.
Everything that taxes goes to. But I'll tell you what, I wish they would work it out so that you didn't have to pay any money you owe from the previous year and your estimated taxes all in the same day, which if you're like me, that's what you're looking at. And we try very hard not to owe any money, but it's happened a couple of years in the past. And you've got to pay your estimated tax all at the same time. It can be brutal. April 15th, you can see why a lot of people who are small business people get a little bit grumbly around this time of year, because that's a double whammy.
we don't talk about it much on ComicLab, but really, it's one of the few downsides I have to running my own business. But it's the price I pay for not having an editor, not having a publisher, being able to do whatever I want, and frankly, loving my life for the other 50 weeks of the year that I'm not doing my taxes. You know, it's 2 weeks of me being miserable. But at the end of it, I always come out. And what's nice, one of the advantageous parts about doing your own taxes, or at least preparing your own taxes as I do, is preparing the paperwork to have someone else do my taxes, is that I at least get a nice bird's eye view of my business for the year. I get to, it's one chance a year also to like take a survey of what worked, what didn't work, what do I need to improve on, what clearly is not working and is on a sliding path for the last 3 or 4 years, that kind of thing. So I hate it, but it also is a chance to sort of review the business, you know?
Absolutely. So, Dave, I've got a question from one of our $5 Patreon backers, and it goes like this. Did you ever feel that you have too many characters, and how do you delineate between main characters and supporting characters? This comes in from our Patreon backer, Nemo. And the question there, Dave, is how do you know if you've got too many characters?
So I'll give you a couple of guiding rules, or maybe two metaphors is a better way of saying it, that I think are helpful. One is the sitcom rule, and another one is the buttons in your car. And I'll tell you what I mean by both. So the sitcom rule is you'll notice that the average sitcom tends to have between 4 and 7 main characters, right? Yep. There are absolutely ancillary characters that are walk-ons, or they put a little color here or there, right? Their voice chimes in for a scene or two. But for the most part, sitcoms have 4 to 7 characters because that's about as much as your cognitive load can handle. Like occasionally you will have a sitcom like Modern Family that I'm just taking a guess at. It has about 25 characters, I would guess, Brad, right?
Yeah.
But that is a far rarer thing because it's harder to do. It's harder to service them all well. And service is the right word there. You want to try to service their character arcs. So there is some value in having, I would say, a core group of 3, 4, 7 core characters that you service the most. And then after that, I'm a little more generous in how wide you can go. I think you can have some fun with walk-ons. You can have some fun with characters that are runners that only appear once every 3 or 4 years. That's fun. But as long as those main core characters are being serviced, I think that is a central tenet. Brad, what do you think?
I agree with you 100% there. And if you're wondering if you've got too many characters or whether your whether your cast is growing too much, I think there's 2 ways that you can tell. And they're basically 2 ways of saying virtually the same thing. Number 1, the silhouette test. If you have a lot of characters that when you create them as a silhouette, they're very, very similar, or they don't have a recognizably different silhouette, that's your first hint that there's not enough variety in your cast, and 2 people might be kind of filling the same visual space. Okay, that's one thing that I would kind of suggest. And the other thing, and a little bit more important, is kind of saying the same thing. And I'll tell you a story. When I rebooted Evil Inc., I had the same thought. This cast is too big. I've got to pare it down to only the people that were important. And what I started doing was I started taking certain sentences, and I'd say, how many people can deliver this sentence genuinely?
Yeah.
And And what happened was I realized that I had no fewer than 3 characters who were all the same exact character. I had a character who was kind of based on Vincent Price because I enjoyed doing the face. I had Dr. Muscadet, who was kind of, remember The Fly, the science fiction? He had a fly for a head, and he was a human from the neck down. He was kind of that. And I had Dr. Heinous, which was, I think I told you before I decided I was going to get all those dog lovers to love my comic by having a dog in my comics, except this one had a brain in a jar attached to his head. It was the last thing that dog lovers were gravitating towards. It was just talk about somebody who wants to tell you about sand but has never been to the beach.
You know what, Brad? You know what I love about dogs as a dog lover is their exposed brain. That's what I love about dogs. That's what makes them cuddly. Yes. No, I know what you mean.
That's just it. The thing that people love about dogs is cuddling, and this was the least cuddly thing. It was done by somebody who had no concept of what he was talking about.
Would you say that your work in and around dogs was equivalent to my work in and around writing romance?
There may be a parallel there. Yes, there may be a parallel. But what happened was I realized that I had 3 characters that were basically the same character. So I took my favorite out of the 3, which was Dr. Muscadet, the fly-headed scientist, because he had the best range in terms of what I could do with them. And the other 2, I just shuttled off. It was like, I don't need these people as much. And I constantly get notes from fans. When's Dr. Haynes coming back? You know, when are we going to see this character again? And you've got to be honest with them. It's never going to happen. I'm not going to make the same mistakes twice. And the same thing, I had a bunch of older guys that were old supervillains because I like writing old people. They're fun, right? And but they all had the same
because
jokes.
Old people don't give a damn anymore, so they're fun to write to, you know?
Yes, and you can play with like a memory that's kind of failing, or somebody that's kind of like Sophia from the Golden Girls is my touchstone. Is this character? She was always explained away as having, well, she had a couple strokes, so she doesn't have the filter anymore. She doesn't filter what she says. So and by the way, if you've ever been around an 80-year-old, you know that they can say whatever they freaking want. With no repercussions because they're 80. What are you going to do?
Oh, yes.
So that's fun to write. But I had 5 of them. And it's like, no, that's in it. One. All you need is one. So I got rid of a bunch of those. So what I would say, in the same way that you apply the silhouette test to the visual of your comic, I would apply that same kind of test to say how many people can say the exact same line in the exact same way. And if that's the case, then you need to get rid of them and get somebody who is the only person that can say a certain type of line.
Right. And so I think the same is true with Drive, Brad, in that if there were certain, if I'm honest about it, if certain line deliveries, the same line could be delivered by 2 or 3 characters. I've tried to get better at that and differentiate those characters over time, and I think I've succeeded at that. But you're right that is a great test for, are these characters necessary? Are these characters differentiated? And are these characters unique, which is what their core thing should be. And so the flip side of this, I want to go to the second metaphor that I was going to talk about, which was the buttons in cars, because even though the main controls of a car, and I say this as somebody who used to own a 68 Oldsmobile Cutlass S, Brad.
Oh, you're talking to a Cutlass Sierra man from back in the day. That was one of my early cars.
Really? Yeah, so that car, my 68 Cutlass Sierra had 4 controls on it. It had a steering wheel, it had a brake, it had gas, and it had a shifter on the column, right? The radio didn't work, the air conditioner didn't work, none of that worked. But all you needed to run that car was 4 things, right? Those were the 4 characters that made that story go, right? But on any good car, though, you have your 4 or 5 main controls, but then there's all these little nuanced controls of like air, seats, mirrors, backlight, all this sort of stuff, right? And what I'm getting at, though, is that the reason why you have all these supplemental characters is basically to test or to trial or to oppose in oppositional fashion the core characters. So you introduce them because they are acidic, or because they are humorous, or because they're lazy and they don't want to do work, or because they're workaholics. And those characters come in, and as an oppositional figure to your core group, they let you better reveal your core characters. And so you need all those little side characters. But it's the balancing act of they're there to service the main story, and they're there to show a better differentiation of the main characters. What do you think, Brad?
Oh, I think you just gave me a huge inspiration here, a brainstorm, because I'm always looking for kind of ways that we can talk about this. When you said 4 key components, the first thing that came to my head was salt, fat, acid, heat.
Yeah, it's true.
When
There's
you
that
talk
similar
about-
idea where that's all you need.
When you talk
Yeah.
about cooking,
Yep.
much of cooking, it can be boiled down to, see what I did there? Boiled down. Can be boiled down to salt,
Oh,
fat,
God.
acid, heat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what would happen, I wonder, is if you tried to create a 4-person cast kind of based on those attributes. A salty
You could absolutely do that. Yes.
right?
Salt, fat, yeah.
Acid, heat. That to me is an amazing ensemble cast.
Keep going on that, because to me, you really struck something there of what is
Yeah.
salt, what is fat, what is acid, what is heat. Like you can really quickly brainstorm 4 characters. What are those 4 characters?
Blanche, Dorothy, Sophia, and Rose. That's salt,
You
fat,
nailed that
acid,
landing.
heat.
You nailed that landing, Brad Geiger.
It is one of my favorite sitcoms.
Yes,
but no,
that's
I mean,
a perfect example. Yeah.
it's also Sex and the City, salt, fat, acid, heat. I mean, really, you could say in your cast who's salt, who's fat, who's acid, who's heat. You could do an amazing job of coming up with a 4-person cast just using that.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
what I would love to do is take a comic and just and use an imaginary, salt, fat, acid, heat, but then to continue that. And it's like, okay, well, I've got a new character, and what is that based on? And I'm not fluent enough in cooking to know what like the 5th element would be, but it would be really fun to apply that to writing and see where it leads you, because there's something very elemental about those 4 components.
It is a fun way. I have to say, I've never thought of it that way, but it's fun to try to figure out, like, because to Brad's point, you're basically setting up characters in opposition to one another that are, in some respects, these 2 are complementary in this regard, but they are oppositional in another regard. So it's a fun way to try to describe character making, and it works for shows like Friends. It works for the Brady Bunch. You can think of any show you can think of, and there's this sort of primary. And here's the thing, that a little trick that I did with Drive a while back is see if you can reduce your characters to a word. Mm-hmm. It's really instructive for how they differentiate from one another. Because, for example, in my sci-fi strip Drive, Nosh is joy. Cuddo is art making. The captain is begrudging leadership. That's 2 words, but you get the idea. If you can reduce them down to 1 word, that character and they serve a purpose. If you're like, well, they're sort of, you don't know that character and they're not yet serving their purpose. You know what I mean? Like if you can't winnow them down, it's a little trickier for you to write to them.
And they're not speaking genuine lines. They're speaking lines, but they're not speaking genuine lines until you really know who they are. Because let's face it, there's a number of lines that you could write in your comic, right? It's a nice day out today, right? But until you know who that character is, you don't know how to word that sentence. Because one character might say it's a nice day out today. The other one might come out and say, there's never been a day like today. The third one might come out and say, this day is all right. That there's a number of ways, and until you find your character's genuine voice, and I'll be honest, I'm still trying to improve that part of my own writing. That's something I'm still trying to get better at, and I don't know whether I ever will.
Absolutely. I think we can both admit that's something we're still working towards.
That's something I'm still working on. But I think as you have these conversations with yourself, you'll know if your cast is too big. You'll know who needs to go and who has to stay.
Well, since Brad put such a beautiful button on that, I think I want to switch gears, Brad, real quick to the question that's burning up everyone's mind that's looking at you on a camera right now. I'm looking in at your studio, Brad. I see a beautiful collection of comic books. I see art on the walls, but I've never seen behind you these 3 gigantic, gorgeous pieces of framed art. What is this, and what's the story here?
Oh, you want to know the story behind that? That's my first ever comic strip. That is the first comic strip I ever did. When I was working on my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree for Alma College, I did a comic strip as part of my senior thesis. And that was and so that's why they're framed so nicely. I had to get them done for my senior thesis, and I kept all the frames and everything. Those used to hang in the studio at my house. And the only reason they're on the ground is they're 3 huge pieces.
They're gigantic,
and I've run out of wall room, so I've got them there until I can figure out something to do with them. But yeah, that was the first comic I ever did.
I say this as a husband myself. I love that they've ended up at your studio and are no longer at the house.
I'm begging my wife to let me bring some of these, not my work. I've got some, because I know she'll never go for that.
The story behind the story. You don't need to go into it as a fellow husband.
I've got so much gorgeous comic art because people send me things, from years of either the Web Comics Weekly or the book, and so I got this gorgeous collection of very kindly gifted comic art, and I get a frame for it, but I'm running out of wall space, and I keep saying, oh, I've got a beautiful sketch that Dave did for me at Baltimore involving a compulsive bladder, and she says, no, that's not hanging in my house.
Well, I got to tell you, so I have, you've seen my original art collection. I've got stuff from the oldest one that I have is from 1746. It's a Hogarth print, like a first edition Hogarth print. And so I got everything from that to World War I, World War II, 20th century comics. But I will tell you this, as a husband myself, I did one of my master's degrees was on World War II propaganda cartooning in Britain, right? And I was living in England at the time. So I would travel around to collectors and sort of art houses. And anytime I saw, if I could afford it, if I saw World War II original comic art, I would buy it, right?
Yeah.
And my wife, to her great credit, because she's 1,000% right, she's like, you know what I don't want hanging in my house? Comics about World War II, thanks. Let's not have, we don't need his Hitler on my wall. I don't need a comic with Hitler on my wall. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. Like, I loved it because as a collector of comic art, I was like, I want to see what the British were saying in terms of their propaganda and the amazing work that they were doing. But she's 1,000% right. No one wants that on their wall. And that is absolutely living in a drawer somewhere in my studio because I'm not putting that up anywhere.
I'm the only person who's actually considered getting a bigger studio just so I can hang more of my art.
Well, I'm out. I actually have no more original art. The last piece to go up was that Bill Watterson from Stripped, and after that, I was like, well, there's no more room at the inn. Sorry, I got to turn you away. So, and also, if anybody wants some World War II propaganda art, drop me a line. I'll email it. I'll send it to you. I don't need it.
That's right. You're clearing it out. Well, on that note, I got to tell people that they've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my pal Brad Geiger. Oh, I got to tell you, what a guy. And I'm not just hemming and hawing because I couldn't find a piece of paper.
You couldn't find your notes.
I got to tell you, he's a gem of a human. I love him like a brother. He's the editor of webcomics.com. I found it. And he's the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com. I was there the whole time. I had it. I nailed it.
Yeah, you were. Yeah, you were. And my good friend, the wonderful Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
I should say, by the way, Brad, that David Lowe is the cartoonist that I have from World War II. And I have never mentioned him before on the podcast. An amazing brushwork cartoonist. Absolutely Google David Lowe, Low. He was an Australian cartoonist working in England. Did amazing work, some of the best work of the 20th century, and you should absolutely check him out. He kind of fell off not fell off the wagon, but he was not as good after the war, but God, he did amazing work during World War II. Anyway, don't know why I'm mentioning that during the close of the show, other than to say the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by our pal Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
And remember that our sponsor on this fine day is Bonjoro at bonjoro.com. That's BONJORO. You can send personal video greetings to people so easy. And like we talked about today, discount codes too. You're going to love it. Check it out. You get a 14-day free trial. And if you love it the way I know you're gonna, you can actually, as a ComicLab listener, sign up to get 20% off for life using the discount code ComicLabApril.
And if you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab, so we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/ComicLab.
So, Brad, you left everybody hanging, and I think everybody needs to know, did you ever get the star on your bowling ball?
I did get the star.
Oh, thank God. I needed closure on the star on the bowling ball.
Oh, my God. Well, listen, we celebrated as a family. We all went out and rented shoes. It was a fantastic time. We didn't actually do any bowling, of course, but we rented shoes just so we could get the feel of it.
We sprayed Lysol on our feet. We rented some shoes. I boiled some nachos in the microwave, and we had a great bowling experience. The whole thing was there. We had some warmed over Pabst Blue Ribbon, and we blared music in the living room that no one wanted to hear. It was just like a bowling alley. It was amazing.
And had some people smoking and blow it in through the window. It was everything you wanted in a bowling experience and less.
For those listeners outside of the U.S., by the way, there is no more Americana activity than going to this building that's long and low. You walk in, you hear the cacophonous sound of bowling balls hitting pins. You rent shoes from a guy that looks like he last bathed 3 weeks ago. He sprays some Lysol into these leatherette shoes that were from 1972, and yet they've been in circulation.
That same style, that kind of saddle. What do you call those saddle shoes?
I don't know. They look like someone's grandma wore them to a sock hop, and then they just went to the bowling alley afterwards.
Yes.
And then you sit down at a bowling alley, you pick a ball that 1,000 hands have touched, and I'm thinking of that in COVID. And then you tend to get some terrible nachos, a terrible beer, and you have a tremendously fun time. I know I made it sound terrible, but it's one of the greatest nights of your year.
Yeah. You're looking around at fashion that hasn't been seen out in the wilds for decades, but there it is in the bowling alley on full display. It's a fantastic place to completely let loose.
And then the next morning you wake up and you go, damn, my drawing arm.
Yeah. What are all these blisters doing on my fingers?
I clearly need to move my body more because throwing a 5-pound ball, I'm destroyed physically.
It was a long way to go for a 96.